You've always been looking for something. That something that sets you apart. That something that makes you more than the person you're living as. More into the person you were created to be. What others see as mundane, you see as magnificent. You catch a glimpse of something new, and it becomes something significant. It's that something extra that keeps you up at night. The hours pass by while everyone else sleeps. You dream, you imagine, you envision what your life might be. What if you were born for more? There's got to be more than just this. I want to be used. That's your greatest wish. The demand for you has always been true. You are gifted and passionate. Add God's purpose to this and watch what He can build. Now, what will you do with what you've been given? Will you put it into motion? Will you take on the responsibility? Will you follow after the calling God has placed on your life? To be fulfilled, to be engaged, to cast out all fears, doubts, and uncertainties, to stand strong, to rise up, to become who you were created to be. Who is the prodigy in you?
Good morning, church. My name's Paul Armiger. I'm the 180 Associate Pastor, and it's my joy to be here with you guys bringing God's Word. Because I haven't had the opportunity to meet many of you, I've only been here for a little over a year. I wanted to introduce myself a little bit, show you a few pictures of who I am to help you get a feel for who you're hearing from, and so that you know a little bit about my family. First of all, I grew up in the Everglades, and I was afraid that while I was talking, if I referenced a swamp buggy, you might not know what I was talking about. So this is a swamp buggy. It's kind of like a redneck monster truck. That's my family in there. My dad's furthest over to the right. He's got the 30-06. My mom's got the 12 gauge right next to him. It's my aunt. You laugh. This is normal. That's my family. That's what I grew up in. And so I'm going to share a little bit more about my family and what it was like growing up down there, just outside of Naples in the Everglades. More currently, my family consists of me and my wife, Tia. I got a picture of her up here. She doesn't normally have a face tattoo. Normally I don't either. We ran the Warrior Dash. It's one of those mud runs a couple weekends ago. It was a lot of fun. We actually ran it with a few different people from the pastoral staff here, and you can see what we look like afterwards. There's Pastor Glenn, who you're just hearing from next to me, and my wife Tia, and Jeff Hughes, and Emily Norvell, and Tracy Fenwick. We had a great time. It was a little bit crazy, but I enjoy those sorts of things. My oldest daughter, her name is Ella. She's 5 years old, just started kindergarten. And broke Daddy's heart to let her go get on that bus, but she wanted to ride the bus to school, so we let her. But she's a great little girl. And our next is Aaliyah, and she's our little blondie. She's off to the left there. You can see they take good care of their dad. So Aaliyah's our middle one. She's a little bit of a fireball. We love that in her. And then our youngest, Odessa, she's really got some fire inside of her. She's not the greatest driver yet. She gets a little angry about those things. And this is all three of them together, how they normally are when they get to playing. We just absolutely love those girls. They are my heart right there. I mean, they're our little world. And I want you to know that as we go through what we're going to discuss today and what we're going to look at from God's Word, and when I look at my family as it is now, and I reflect on it and ask, God, how did I get here to where I have a significant marriage, and I have a family with these young girls that are growing up learning how to love you, and they're making good choices, and they're doing what they're supposed to do. How did I get to this place of stability when what I come from had so much instability, when there was so much addiction and so many problems that were obvious and prevalent throughout my family? How did I get here? The answer to that is God's grace, the healing that God can provide, obeying His Word. And we're gonna see some of those things, and I'm going to share some of those things. We're continuing on in the series that Pastor Greg has been taking us on called Discover Your Destiny. If you haven't been here over the course of the last few weeks, Pastor Greg's been taking us through these steps and these lessons from Joseph's life about discovering God's destiny for our life. And today we continue on in that, and the title for today is When History Interrupts Your Destiny. When History Interrupts Your Destiny. As is our habit here, would you stand with me for the reading of God's Word? Before the years of famine came, and this is Genesis 41, verses 50 through 55. Before the years of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph by his wife. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh and said, "It is because God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household." The second son he named Ephraim and said, "It is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering." The 7 years of abundance in Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had said. There was famine in all the other lands, but in the whole land of Egypt there was food. When all Egypt began to feel the famine, the people cried to Pharaoh for food. Then Pharaoh told all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph and do what he tells you." May God add the blessing to the reading of his word. You may be seated. Now, as we go through Joseph's life up to this point, Joseph started off as kind of a spoiled kid. He was the favored son amongst many sons. He got special clothes. He got special attention from dad. He got special recognition. He even got to give oversight to his older brothers who were adults while they were working and would come back and give reports to his dad. He was kind of a spoiled kid. And he got this dream from God about how one day God was going to raise him up and use him, and that his brothers would bow to him, and even his father and his mother would bow to him. And Joseph, not having a lot of tact, just openly shared this in kind of a rough way with his family. And his dad was like, "What are you talking about, Joseph? You think I will actually bow to you?" And his father kept it in mind, but his brothers heard that and they got enraged. So Joseph kind of went from spoiled kid to nearly murdered because his brothers grabbed him and decided that they were going to just finish him off. And they threw him in a pit, and they were thinking about what to do, and they saw some slave traders coming by, and they took Joseph and they sold him into slavery. And they said, "That's better than having blood on our hands." So Joseph went spoiled kid, nearly murdered, to being in the slave trade. And then he was sold into slavery in Potiphar's house. He served diligently, humbly, and God blessed him and rose him up. And then he got accused of rape by Potiphar's wife and got thrown into prison with the key locked up. So now spoiled kid, nearly murdered, sold in the slave trade, accused rapist, prisoner. Joseph's life has been rough, and Joseph spent years in prison. And those times, God still had his hand on him, blessed him, brought him up, within prison, and he interpreted these dreams of some other prisoners. The cupbearer was the one who said, Joseph interpreted his dream and said, "You're going to get restored. Remember me when you get restored." And the cupbearer forgot him, and he sat in prison even longer until Pharaoh had this dream. The cupbearer remembered him, brought him out of jail, and said, "Here, Pharaoh, here's an accused rapist that can interpret dreams." And Pharaoh listened to him. And as God gave Joseph the interpretation for the dream, the Pharaoh said, "Who else in the land is as wise and discerning as you? I'm going to put you in charge of everything. No one else in the land will be more powerful for you except for me." And Joseph was risen up. And when you get to this point of the story, right before where our passage has, it almost seems like, from a literary standpoint, that if you're reading this, you'd probably say, this seems like this is going to be the resolution. That, Joseph has gone through tons of trials, and he's done his best, and he's risen up, and then he just gets smacked right down, and now he's king of the most powerful nation in the world at the time. He has a wife. He has 2 sons. It seems like this is the resolution point. Everything is better now. But the thing that you probably saw as we read that scripture, and that we're going to talk about, is that Joseph's past interrupts his destiny. And the point that I want to make in this first portion is the ignored pain of our past, it will interrupt our destiny. The ignored pain of our past, it will interrupt our destiny. As he was naming his kids, Joseph in verse 51 said, the firstborn's name is Manasseh, for he said, "God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household." Joseph hasn't forgotten his father's household. Verse 52, he named the second Ephraim, for he said, "God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction." Joseph isn't calling Egypt his home, he's calling it the land of his affliction, which it was, and it seems like it still is. And if you fast forward a little bit to Genesis 42, 45, when his brothers finally do come, you'll know with certainty that Joseph has not dealt with this, that he's not okay with it yet, that he hasn't experienced healing in it, because it seems like he's deciding whether he's going to give wrath or grace to his brothers. If he kind of framed them a few times. He scared them quite a few times. He pretended that he could use divinity and know what they were doing one time. Joseph was still dealing with this. And in fact, he had to run to other rooms at times and weep. because of the pain that happened in his past was there with him in his present. And I want you guys to realize this too, because over the past few weeks, as we've looked, Joseph has an incredibly strong character to this point. When he was in Potiphar's household, he demonstrated an incredibly strong character. When he was in prison, he showed he has a very strong character. But I don't want you to get the picture that Joseph is some sort of Jesus. Joseph is not Jesus. Joseph is a biblical hero, just like many other heroes. But as you look through their lives, and I'm encouraged by this because as I try to seek God and serve God and I fail and mess up, when I read scripture and I read about Joseph and, early on his mistakes and just the fact that he's still struggling with his history, that encourages me. When I look at Abraham, who was a great biblical hero in ancient Israel, that if you spoke poorly of Father Abraham, you were likely to get stoned to death. Abraham, when he was following God's command and going through lands, Abraham got scared by some other kings and basically rented out his wife's body for his own safety. I mean, it was a detestable error, detestable sin that he committed in doing that. I mean, Peter is a constant encouragement because every situation Peter's in, the Apostle Peter, he seemed to mess up. He hops out, starts walking on the water, is looking at Jesus, looks over the waves and starts getting worried that Jesus isn't enough and starts sinking. I mean, he constantly messed up, and that's an encouragement to me. But I want you to realize there is only one Jesus in Scripture. There's only one. Joseph is not him. Joseph is someone we can learn things from, but he's not by any means perfect. And as we look at Joseph's life and the pain that he was trying to process and deal with, I just wanted to highlight something that the pain in our life, it often comes from our own choices. You could easily say, well, Joseph got thrown in that pit because of his dream and the way that he told his brothers about it. Sometimes pain in our life, we have pain in our life because of choices we've made. Sometimes we have pain in our life because choices that other people have made, because choices that family members have made. And that choice has affected us, and it's brought pain and suffering into our life. And it wasn't anything that we did, but it's just an experience that we have, and it's the truth. We have pain because of other people sometimes. And sometimes terrible things happen, and we can't explain why. It's not any one person's fault. We can't pinpoint it. It's a sickness. It's an accident. It's something. Pain comes into our life in lots of different ways. And no matter how or why the pain enters our life, it doesn't change the fact that we need to process it. We need to deal with it. And we need to give it to God. And as I look at Joseph and I look at the way that we as a culture try to process or maybe even just cover up our pain, I look at Joseph. He has ascended up the corporate ladder as far as you can ever go. Most powerful nation in the world, and he's ruling it. Pharaoh says, when someone comes to ask Pharaoh a question, he says, go ask Joseph. Joseph is in charge. As far as saying, if you think in some way achieving a certain level of success is going to cover up your past pain or heal your hurt, look to Joseph and realize you're wrong. Because he was there, he was at the highest point, and he still had things that he needed to process. He still had things that made him weep. He had family hurts that were unhealed. The next promotion's not going to do it. The right spouse isn't going to do it. The right car isn't going to do it. And we find things that will distract us and make us forget about things for a little bit, but we always find that past pain, it will interrupt our current success. And as we put more and more space between that pain and where we are at currently, it just seems like it complicates the matter. I think we've all had those times at night where we've laid in bed and thought about that issue, that problem, that argument. And as we replay it in our mind, we always do a little bit better and better in the argument. We would have known what to say if it happened again, right? Yeah, we get better at arguing as the time goes on, but it just seems to increase the bitterness in us. And there's a reason why Ephesians 4:26 tells us not to let the sun go down on our anger. As we allow more space to go between those things, it gets worse for us. And that verse also highlights it's not wrong to feel anger, but don't sin in your anger. And don't let space get in between your current situation and dealing with your problems. Jesus spoke very directly to this in Matthew 5:23. He was saying, if you're in the temple presenting your offering before the altar, and you're doing this, I mean, how much better situation can you be in? I'm in church. I'm doing exactly what I should do. I'm giving a gift to God. He says, if you're in the middle of doing that, and you remember a brother has something against you, leave it there and go and resolve the issue and then come back. I mean, that's immediate. Don't just finish your church stuff. go and handle it, because there is a connection between how we can worship God and our relationships to the people that are in our lives. There's a very strong connection there. And Jesus put those relationships at a very high level when he said, stop the worship until you've handled those relationships. We need to deal with the unfinished business. We need to deal with the pain. We need to deal with the problems. And I'll steal some wisdom from Nelson Mandela when he said, holding on to resentment or pain is like swallowing poison and hoping it kills your enemy. When we allow pain and history to just fester in our hearts, it only hurts us. It doesn't hurt anyone else. Our ignored pain will show itself in our present life. And it's important to understand your pain because in many ways, it has sent your life in a specific direction. Your past pains usually change the way you perceive a current situation. You walk into something, and if it's similar to what you felt before, you'll have flags go up. You'll put up walls. You'll stop yourself. Our past pain changes the way that we live our life in the future. And the way that I would actually describe that is that your history shapes your velocity. And velocity, it's direction and speed. That's a really simplified explanation of velocity. But the direction you're going with your life, how fast you're moving on it, that is largely shaped by your history. And I'll tell you, as far as it goes, I can relate with past pain. I felt that, and I think we all have these stories, not just I skinned my knee stories, but I was afraid to go home stories, I felt completely alone. I felt like I was at a dead end, and I just couldn't go anywhere. I think we all have these stories of pain. Some of them are more severe, some of them are not as severe, but they're all meaningful to us in our stories, and they all have to be dealt with. My story, like I said before, it kind of starts down in the Everglades, where my family had this, we called it a ranch. It was a few acres where, you'd come in on the road, and my Uncle Bobby's trailer was here, my grandpa's house was here, our trailer was here, my Aunt Maxine's house is here, my Uncle Rusty's here, and it's all family on this little, redneck heaven. We had airboats, we went frog gigging, where you poke a frog with a long pointy stick and go and cook its legs later. We were all the men in the family were commercial fishermen pretty much. They'd go deep sea fishing for a few weeks, so it really smelled great around there most of the time. But that was our family, that was normal. And growing up, it was a pretty decent place to grow up. I thought, I was 4 years old, got my first BB gun, Red Ryder, for Valentine's Day when I was a 4-year-old. I had my little three-wheeler that I'm wheeling around on, shooting at birds and stuff. Life was good. Reflecting back, I do see some things differently. That, at all the gatherings we had, there was always piles and piles of empty beer cans. Thinking back, I can realize that my family wasn't talking about dishware when they talked about someone left pot out and the kids saw it. There was issues there. There was substance abuse issues there. There was, problems. But when I looked at my family, my dad, he was kind of like the loudest voice in the room. He was kind of the person who, when he spoke, the family listened. And he was the captain of the ship. When we were out on the boat, all the men had to listen to him. So, he was my hero. He was the guy. And we just kind of went through life up until the point when I was about 9, and he went on a fishing trip to Colombia, South America. And it was this 1-month thing where he's going to make a lot of money, and family didn't really like the idea of it, but he's trying to support the family. He's going to do it. And so he went, and 1 month turned into 3, and 3 months turned into 6, and 6 turned into a year. And eventually he just said it. He said, "I'm not coming home." And we went from, this tight-knit little family to my dad's gone. And everybody else who lived on the ranch with us, they were all my dad's family. So here's my mom and me and my sister, who's 3 years older than me, just kind of alone now. And everywhere my mom looks, all she can see is reminders of her husband who left. And so she says, "We got to move. I can't do this." So we moved to Georgia. So in that year, we lost my dad. We lost our family to us. We lost our friends, all of our normalcy. And it was extremely painful. And, for me, I felt like my dad, he just picked fishing over me. He'd rather fish by himself in South America. It's hard. That's my story of how it happened. Seeing my mom go into depression and do her absolute best as a single mom to keep us raised, keep us fed and clothed. My sister dealing with the pain of our dad leaving and the loss of her disciplinary figure in the house. Her trying to process, what do I do now? And we didn't have God. We didn't have a church family in our life. So there wasn't any real healing that could go there. We tried to do some counseling. It wasn't all that beneficial. And so really what we did is we just tried to keep moving and mask the pain. For me, maybe if I'm successful enough in soccer, if I get good enough at soccer, then that will make me significant and I won't feel this pain anymore. And as I became a later teenager, it was, maybe if I have this right girlfriend, maybe if, I have the right vehicle, maybe if I drink enough in front of these people, then I'll feel significant. Maybe if it's the drugs, maybe if I do some drugs, that will make me feel significant enough. And all the things that I felt like the world says, this is what makes you big, this is what makes people listen to you, this is what makes you feel significant, all of those things that I tried just felt like another scar. They didn't heal the pain, they didn't help. Sometimes it would distract me for a little bit from it, but it would come right back. It was just like this darkness that would just keep coming back. And so, for me, I look at Joseph's life and say, if Joseph could ascend to the highest position on earth almost, as far as men's positions can go, of what they can achieve, of other people looking at them saying, wow, they're great, they're significant. If Joseph can get there and his pain from his past still isn't gone, what hope is there for me to say, I'm going to climb, this social ladder so much until I don't feel my pain anymore? There's none. You can't. I can't. You can't. There's no way. There's no way that you will find enough significance in what you do as your job or what you achieve or how other people look at you to make that past pain go away. It's not healed in that form. It's not healed in that fashion. And so for me, life kind of kept going until about the age of 16. And, I tried to do the things that I enjoyed to mask the pain, to cover it, to just get through life, really. And one of the things that I found is, I'd have a lot more time to have fun if I just never did any homework, and I could still pass school by taking, just with the tests for most of my high school career. But later in that, they start weighing the homework more, and I still wasn't doing homework, so I ended up going to summer school. But I learned I was really okay with summer school because all of my friends were there. And because they brought kids from other high schools that, were like me, it just conjoined like 5 different high schools all in one summer school, I found lots of new friends that were just like me and a really good dating pool to draw from. So, summer school wasn't that bad for me. And I met this guy named Casey, and Casey and I initially hated each other, and it was in this moment where we were about to get in a fist fight in front of a class, at least I thought we were, and then it just didn't happen. And from that moment afterwards, it was like we just became friends. And it was weird. We were both some messed up kids with some messed up families, but we became best friends. And Casey is from Georgia. His mom is from North Carolina. And I'm going to tell you, she's your typical big Southern mama. When big Southern mama talks, you listen and you don't talk back, and you don't even look at her directly in the eyes when she's talking because, she'll lay it down on you. But when you stay at her house on Saturday night, you go to church Sunday morning, and there's just not questions about that. And so I did that, because Casey and I hang out all the time. And so we went to the church. Nothing really significant happened there. People were nice, whatever. I'd been dragged to church a few times before. I was good with it. But eventually we found out that there were cute girls at youth group. So we went to youth group and really terrorized the place for a year. I mean, it was bad, giving people wedgies until their underwear broke. Reasons things that do not happen at 180 and would not happen. So I'm just telling you, but they were happening there, and was there for a year and heard the message of the gospel and had, the youth pastor kind of give me the eye after his invitation each time for a year, not really understanding why. But I remember the summer before my senior year of high school, the point I was at North Arnold Mill Road and Highway 5, where I had to just turn off the radio in my truck because it was like God was speaking to something to me. I just felt uneasy in my heart is I guess the way that I describe it, because it's not I've ever heard God speak to me, but I knew I just need to turn off my radio and listen. And it was as if God was giving me this question. And the question was, Paul, if eternity was a timeline that stretched out before you, the little timeline with the arrows that means it goes forever, if it's a timeline stretched out before you, would your life even be a visible speck of dust on that timeline? And my answer is no. No, it wouldn't. I mean, eternity is huge. 100 years is nothing. And then it was he followed up with the question, then Paul, what sense would it make for you to live your life for anything but for me all out? It wouldn't make any sense. That must be what this life's about. And it was like in that moment, the message that I had heard countless times about how Jesus died on the cross to forgive my sins, to take away my shame and my pain, it made sense for the first time. And that he rose from the grave to show that he had the authority to forgive sins, the ability to give new life, to make a new creation out of me. It made sense for the first time, and I gave my heart to God that night, right on the intersection of a road. And God began to do some crazy changes in my life. And I'm going to tell you, there's like this spiritual high that happened right at the beginning. And it was like the darkness that I had always felt, that had always just been there enveloping me as I try to go to sleep at night. It's like that darkness was gone, but my old habits would still haunt me. And I was faced with this decision as I made an intellectual decision to follow God. I was faced with an internal heart decision about would I follow him with my life. And I want you to know, and I experienced this as I was faced with my old temptations, habits, and addictions, that God didn't leave me trapped. God has given me the ability to change directions. He's given you the ability to change directions. There is no history. There is no past sins. There's nothing so wrong with you that you can't go in a new direction because God has given you the ability to change directions. I came to Christ at the age of 17, and God began changing my life, and I'm very thankful for his patience in that because, man, there was so much wrong with me. There's so much that I saw, but as God began to speak to me, it was like he just walked gently with me and said, Paul, your language right now, that's what I want you to see, and that's what I want you to change. Matthew 12:34, I spoke to you. From the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks, and that is not what is in your heart. That's not me. I'm in your heart. So change that. And Paul, this addiction right here, this is what I want you to see. You have that language thing down. This is where we're going next. And at each point, it was like an intersection. Will I listen to God or will I continue on my own? And each point, I had to make that decision to change my course. My life had set me on one, but God gives us an ability to change it. And so life kind of was going, and I went to Toccoa Falls College after I graduated high school, narrowly. But I went to Bible college, and I was serious about my education at this point and did really well. Really enjoyed my college stuff because I got to study God's Word. I got to study youth ministry. My bachelor's degree is in youth ministry, and I basically have a minor in Bible because everyone who goes to school has to. It was awesome. I loved it. And I really felt like, if you were looking at my life, this was almost like the resolution point. Like Paul is finally getting it together despite his past. And when I was about 19, a pastor by the name of Louis Giglio, which is a name that probably a lot of you guys know, I was able to go to 722 because I only lived 40 minutes from the church Louis served at the time. And so he was doing the sermon series called Seeing God as a Perfect Father. And it was about how there is this connection between how we see God based on how we saw our Father and what our relationship with our Father was like. And I'm going to tell you, Louis was meddling in my business, and I did not like it. Life was pretty good. Like, I was following God. I was doing the things that God wanted me to do. Like, the major sins that people, can point at, they were gone in my life. Now, it was just the littler ones that you had to look harder for. But here, God was beginning to speak to me. Paul, there's part of your heart that you've been keeping away from me. There's part of your heart that is not healed yet because you've had walls up around it. And I want you to see this right now, Paul. I want you to open this right now. And I was like, I don't want to rehash that, so I'm going to go read a book instead of listen to Louis because I don't want to hear that, and start reading Wild at Heart, and it addresses the same thing. I was supposed to address like adventure. I like adventure, but it starts addressing, God as a father in it. And at that point I was like, man, okay, God is really getting in my face about this. I guess I have to deal with it. And I want you to know that, as I began to do that and listen to God, I was like, man, this isn't going to go well. And so, I figured out what I needed to say to my dad some, and I hadn't talked to the guy in like 3 or 4 years because he just doesn't call much and he's out on a boat all the time. So when I finally do talk to him, surprise, it doesn't go well. It wasn't like, the perfect story where, we just want to embrace each other through the phone. It didn't end well. But I'm going to tell you, there is never a circumstance in which where you obey God's leading on your heart, where it would have been better if you didn't listen to God. Listening to God always produces a fruit in you that is beneficial, even if the circumstance feels like it didn't go well. And I know that for myself, as I finally opened up that can, because since I was 10 years old, we had just covered it up. We would say, I love you on the phone. Everything's great. Yeah, soccer's good. Was it a good fishing trip? Okay, great, bye. Let's not talk about anything significant. When I finally opened that up, I finally began to see God's healing in that area of my life. And I also knew that in that moment that I was better prepared to be a father one day when that would come, because I dealt with these things. I talked to you a little bit about my girls at the beginning. I'm going to tell you, man, those girls are my heart. I'm going to make sure they feel love every day of their life from their father. God can take those pains and he can use them, but I'm going to tell you, dealing with our history, it helps set new direction. Dealing with our history, it helps set new direction. If you think that you can just leave it behind, I want you to know it's going to follow you, and it's going to bump into you, and it's going to rough up your present. We have to deal with those things. And I want you to know that, now I'm in youth ministry, and it's far too often. It was even just this Wednesday, as I sat across a table from a student who through tears poured out his heart, that, my family's ripping apart. I feel alone. I feel pain. And I can look him in the eyes, and I can tell him, you know what? I felt that pain too. And I know how hard it is. But I'll tell you this, God is the only one that can heal that pain. Through your relationship with him, he is the only one who can change that, who can heal that in you and even take it and then use it for good. And it's not that it excuses the behavior of the family. It's not that it excuses what happened in the past, but it's just the truth that God can take anything and then use it for good as it's given to him. Joseph discovered this, and he said it really well in Genesis 50:20 when he was speaking with his brothers about what happened. And he said, what you meant for evil, God used for good. And I have felt that, and I have seen that happen in life after life. And yes, your past has pain, but God has a future. God has a future for you despite what's happened. And God will help you change direction from your past and from your pain. And God will take us, no matter how broken and messed up, and he will trade that destruction for something that is stable. He will trade, those ashes for something beautiful. And to borrow, the next point from Isaiah 61, verse 1 through 3, God can create a crown of beauty from a pile of ashes. God can take anything in your history, anything that you think has stained you, and he can heal you from it, and he can turn you into something beautiful. He can heal those past hurts. God used years of slavery to shape a king out of Joseph. And think about those years spent in prison. And granted, Christmas hadn't happened yet, but he was spending all of the holidays that were celebrated behind those bars. While he could hear and think about people celebrating, thinking about this is the harvest time back home. Right now my family is celebrating. He was in a prison that had no indoor plumbing. There was no indoor plumbing yet. There was just, this little brick walls that he did everything in, year after year. Joseph went through some hard stuff. Surely he went through and replayed the event of his brothers throwing him into the pit, the view of his brothers becoming a distant dot on the horizon as he was dragged off to slavery. Surely that replayed in his mind year after year. He had the pain. God took that and he used it to form a king who was ready to preserve a nation. But I want you to know at the same time, suffering, it isn't inherently beneficial. The pain that we've experienced just by itself is not just a good thing, because many of us go through pain, and I saw this in my own family, where it's like we go through this painful event, and we just kind of want to crawl into the fetal position and lay there until the world comes and makes us better, because the world did this to me, and it's the world's fault, and so now I'm just going to sit here, and I'm going to wait for the world to make this better. We turn to this entitlement thinking, or this I'm too damaged to do anything, so I'm just not going to try thinking. And I want you to know, no person is going to fix your past pain. No person is going to come in and make this better for you. It's going to be you deciding to give this over to God and trust him to heal it and trust him to trade your ashes for his beauty. It's going to be something that happens internally in you. And if you think you are too torn up or too messed up to do anything good or serve God, I want to give you just a small reminder of God's power. I mean, just rewind back to the beginning when his voice brought the universe into existence. When his voice spoke the sun that burns at 27 million degrees and that could fit 1.3 million Earths inside of the sun, when his voice brought that to existence. And our sun is just a small star in the night sky. There's so much bigger. There's so much bigger things that God's voice can do than that is immeasurably more powerful than what we can even understand. He says that he reached in and formed man out of the dirt and spoke life into him. Just a small touch of God's hand, just the echoing of his voice can do so much. But bigger than that, he says, I have placed my spirit and my presence in those who believe. His presence with you, not just his voice, not just a touch of his hand, but his presence with you on a daily circumstance. As you go through each step, he is walking with you. You can't look at that and say, I'm unable to do this. I can't walk through this. I'm not good enough. It has nothing to do with your ability. It has to do with God's ability. God doesn't call the enabled, he enables the called. When he asks you to do something, he's going to give you the ability to do it. And for anyone else to look at you and say, no, you're not capable of this, or for you to look at you and say, no, I'm not capable of this, listen to what God has to say in Romans 14:4. Who are you to judge someone else's servant? To their own master, the servant stands or falls, and they will stand, for the Lord is able to make them stand. God will do it in your life. God will give you the strength to do it in your life. And the Apostle Paul, he is an authority to go to on these things because he was constantly, physically getting beaten down for the calling that God had on his life. There was many times where his life was in danger, where people left him because they thought he was dead. And he writes and he says, I feel weak, I feel bloodied and beaten down, but I am not crushed. 2 Corinthians 4:8-9. Because Paul knows God is causing, and he writes this, he says, God is causing all things to work together for those who are called according to God's purpose in Romans 8:28. And he says, God will bring the work that he began in you to full completion. He wrote that in Philippians 1:6. God does not leave work undone. And when he says, I'm going to do something in you, he will do it to completion. We can stand under the pressure of anything because God will make us able to stand. So don't you give up. Don't you disqualify yourself before you start. God made a king out of a slave. God made the earth out of his voice. And he can make something out of you. He has a plan and a destiny for your life. And we stand upon the immovable foundation that is Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ has given us hope. He's given us new life. He's giving us peace and joy and love. The presence of his Spirit in our life and the fruits of his Spirit in our life should be coming out of us. And that gives us endurance to get through what would have felt impossible before. And while I have experienced that presence and that indwelling presence of Christ in my life, and it's gotten me through the impossible before, I won't ever forget, and I don't want to ever forget what it was like before I had God in my life. And I'm going to share a depressing story with you. I know that's so exciting to hear. I'm going to share a depressing story with you about a guy named Bill. And I've shared this with some of our students before because I just don't think there's a more potent way to understand this. This is actually a suicide note. This was left before he took his life. He was a computer programmer, and he experienced a very troubled past. And the way that he talks about something is what I'm just going to pull a few excerpts out because the note is long. But he continually talks about this darkness that was in his life. And when I read this note for the first time, I was like, man, I remember that. I remember that feeling. I remember that darkness. I remember that cloud that just felt like it was with me. So I'm going to read you a couple excerpts from this. I have the urge to declare my sanity and justify my actions, but I'll assume I'll never be able to convince anyone that this was the right decision. Maybe it's true that anyone who does this is insane by definition, but I can at least explain my reasoning. I considered not writing any of this because of how personal it is, but I like tying up loose ends, and I don't want people to wonder why I did this. My first memories as a child are of being abused repeatedly. This has affected every aspect of my life. This darkness, which is the only way I can describe it, has followed me like a fog, but at times intensified and overwhelmed me. usually triggered by a distinct situation. This darkness followed me as I grew up. I remember spending hours playing with Legos, having my world consist of me and a box of cold plastic blocks, just waiting for everything to end. It's the same thing I do now, but instead of Legos, it's surfing the web or reading or listening to a baseball game. Most of my life has been spent feeling dead inside, waiting for my body to catch up. At times growing up, I would feel inconsolable rage. I was able to keep the darkness at bay for a few hours at a time by doing things that require intense concentration, but it would always come back. The darkness is with me nearly every time I wake up. Alcohol was also something that let me escape the darkness. It would always find me later, though, and it was always angry that I managed to escape, and it made me pay. Many of the things I did were a result of it. Alcohol and drugs provided a way to ignore the realities of my situation. It was easy to spend the night drinking and forget that I had no future to look forward to. He continues to talk about how the darkness affected the relationships he was in, how it affected his success as a programmer. It affected everything. And maybe as I read that, maybe it connects with you and you say, you know what, I feel that because I've been living in that. Maybe it reminds you of where you were before you knew Christ. Maybe you have the joy and the privilege of knowing Christ through your life and you never had to experience that. But the thing for me is, I don't ever want to reach the point where I forget that the city around me is living without the joy and the presence of God that I have known. I don't ever want to forget that there's children and men and women going to sleep at night saying that this would describe my life, this darkness, this aloneness, this feeling like everything I do is just tainted. And so we have this amazing knowledge and experience at church. We have this time where we get to just celebrate God and worship. And we have it and we hear God's word and it's meaningful to us and we share our testimonies about how God is working. And so what are we going to do? Are we going to just keep that inside these four walls? Do we just continue to celebrate here over and over and just keep it right here while we know that our city is living, out in this dark place, that they have not experienced this transformation that God offers of going from ashes to beauty? No, we're not going to just hang on to that. And as you guys hear us begin to speak about the big push, I want you to realize we're not just going to keep God in here. We're going to make a scene about it. We're going to make it to where you can't live in Muncie without hopefully hearing something that will lead you to the hope about God. And I don't want you to think that when we talk about reaching our community with the big push, that it's something about numbers or money or about pride. It's not about that. It's about the fact that the people on staff here have experienced God's healing in their life in an amazing way. And we cannot imagine keeping that to ourselves. That is what drives us. The presence of God in our life is driving us to say, we have to do something. That not another year without them hearing and having the opportunity. And so yes, we're going to do billboards. Yes, we're going to do yard signs. Yes, we're going to knock on doors. Yes, we're going to go to tailgate parties and set things up so that people will see and people will hear and people will have the interaction and we can share about God's love for them and their plan for them and the fact that they have a destiny and God is waiting for them to see it. And so we're moving. And when we do our services, yes, God does amazing things in the services. We're investing hundreds of hours to make these services so compelling that people will experience God's presence. And so when you bring someone here with you, I want you to know we are praying, we are preparing, we are digging the ditches so God can pour out his blessing. That's why we need the second sanctuary set up. That's why we need people to work it. And so for you tonight, what I want you to begin asking is, what is God calling me to do? Because some of you guys are hearing this message today and you're saying, I need to let God's light and presence come into my life. I need to solidify my relationship with him. I need to let him heal those old hurts. I need to give that to him. Some of you guys are saying, yeah, I'm walking with God and I'm on this mission with you. And so I'm going to step into this. Tell me how I can help with the big push. God is calling me to help with the big push. This is where we're going. We're going to the place where people have that hope. But it's going to move through his people. So what are we going to do?